Okay, hi guys. Um, I can Michał Kij from Gertron.net. On our stream chat, I can see only myself. So, guys, if you are online and you're listening to us, please just give us a sign on the chat, so I know that someone is listening to it. Yeah, please. Please let us know if you can hear us good. If you can good see the video and the presentation good. Mhm. Mhm. Hi guys, I can see that we have seven guests listening to us. Um, if everything is fine, just let us know in the chat that you can hear me good, and you can see the presentation that everything is fine. Johnny M5, hello, hi guy. Yeah, so just let us know if everything is working fine on your end. You can hear and see everything. Oh, yeah, so Johnny said audio is fine. Great. Very happy that we have the technical parts working. Valentina Cenucci, hi. Sorry if I spelled your name wrong, Valentina. Mm. So DJ, I can hear you. I don't. If I say everybody can hear me, so yeah. Just wanted to say that I have there is DJ with us, DJ who's responsible for the technical part, and he's also my director in my head, who is like in a professional uh, morning television. Mhm. Okay, so let's start. So first we'll start with with a presentation about types of the render farms. And if you have a question, if you have any questions during that part, please just type them in our chat window, and we'll make a short break, and I will answer all your questions according to my knowledge about farm. So my name is Michał, and I've been working in GarageFarm.net for I think 5 or 6 years now, mostly as a technical guy. We call ourselves render wranglers. So, and we are farming. This is what we do. So I have the knowledge, inside knowledge of how farms work and what possible issues can appear during using the farm. I'm usually one of the guys who are fixing the problems. So if you have any questions during the presentation, just type them into the chat, and we'll answer them during the break. Then we'll do another part of the presentation, and again, we'll have time to answer all your questions. Yeah, and Marco, our colleague who farmed with us for some time now, he's more of a content tutorials guy. He will start the presentation, and together with him, we will go through all the types of farms and explain what choice you have on the market, how these farms work technically, and what are their advantages and disadvantages. So we can do a good, well-informed choice when you are looking for a render farm.
Hi everyone, welcome to this webinar. So we want to thank you for being here, and yeah, from wherever you are in the world, hello. I'm Marco. I helped in automation and in wrangling in my earlier years in the company, and now I work with the editorial and marketing department.
And my name is Michał, and for many years I have been working as a render wrangler, so working on support, overlooking farm, and yeah, in general I'm also CG artist, and I work together with Marco in marketing and content department as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's us. So before we begin the presentation, we just wanted to go over a few sort of an agenda, I suppose. Okay, so what we're going to do basically is we'll go through the presentation shortly. We'll be talking about what render farms are, what they do. We'll be going through some common third-party service models that are used for rendering, which includes the render farm model. But before we get to that, we'll take a pause. And in this pause, we'll be looking through the comments, through the chat box, sorry, for any comments or questions you guys leave behind. And we'll take this time to answer as many of them as we can. So as the presentation is happening at any point, feel free to ask questions, and be assured that we'll get to them at some point in the presentation. So after the pause, we'll continue with the cloud rendering service model, which describes the common model for third-party render farms. And then we'll talk about how we at GarageFarm.net have adopted this model. And then we'll address common problems with cloud render farms and how we, as a service, deal with those problems. And at the end of the presentation, we'll have a longer Q&A session where we'll continue going through all of your questions and answering them. Yeah, so at any point, if you feel the need to ask anything, just leave it in the chat box, and we'll get to it. Okay, so that's it. So for everyone who's attended this webinar, we've prepared a nice little thank you present for you guys at the end. So stick around till the end to find out what it is. Okay, and then lastly, if you can switch your YouTube settings to HD, I'm pretty sure you'll be able to read through the presentation anyhow. But yeah, for the best experience, watch in HD. Okay, so I think that's it for the agenda, and we can finally get to the actual presentation. So without further ado, we'll be talking about what a render farm is. What is a render farm? So simply put, a render farm is a host of computers dedicated to 3D rendering. And historically, the term was coined by someone from Autodesk, I believe. They were rendering frames for an animated short, and at the time they had somebody who would manually render and collect batches of frames over their host of computers in-house. And this employee had a habit of wearing overalls to work, so it kind of prompted someone to remark that he was essentially farming frames. And today, a render wrangler or farmer describes someone that monitors the rendering of frames over a farm. And yeah, the farm itself is what refers to the host of computers that do the rendering. Okay, so in the earlier anecdote, someone manually configured each computer, but these days a farm is often managed over a network using a sort of task management software that distributes commands or tasks for each computer to execute. And so these computers that execute the commands are slave computers, or we call them nodes. And some of the key tasks the render management software might delegate would be allocating nodes to a job, for example, deploying 3D software licenses to each node, opening a 3D project, of course, passing the command that will render a frame or a sequence of frames from a project, installing plugins, and transferring files between network volumes to local directories. But that depends on the infrastructure. But these are common instructions that you might expect. And additionally, this management software usually communicates with another application that's dedicated to managing or rendering at the same time, depending on how many nodes are available on the farm. So this queue managing software will prioritize jobs based on the time of launch, as well as how they are prioritized by the user. So you can usually indicate how high up in priority you want your job to be. And this is true if you were using software like Backburner across your own render farm, or if you were working with a third-party service like us. Okay, so a render farm's goal is basically to parallelize the task of rendering a sequence of frames by assigning a frame range or a single frame to its own machine, so that multiple machines can be rendering each frame at the same time. So basically this kind of describes what's going on. On a personal workstation, if you were rendering a sequence in which each frame would average about an hour of rendering time, and you had 300 frames in the sequence, then you would be rendering for 300 hours because it renders, your one machine will be rendering these frames linearly. If you delegated your job over to a farm, you can parallelize the task. And so let's say 100 frames are rendered per hour, you end up only having to render for 3 hours. Okay, so already I think it's pretty clear that render farms are invaluable when delivering animated sequences for a job, and time is of the essence. Of course, apart from parallelizing your renders, it also leaves your workstation available for you to continue working, right? So that's it basically. And Andrew, if you'd continue on.
Yeah. So anyone can build a farm with enough time and budget, but the opportunity costs in space, time, and money. So buying licenses and hardware is costful, and also at some level you need a special energy supply to connect the farm. So just a home supply or a regular office supply may not be enough. And in-house farm is often not ideal for many studios, not to mention an individual or small team. It also takes resources to maintain it. You usually need one technical person to take care of it, like hardware and software problems. Also, if there are periods of downtime for the farm, it may make the farm not so cost efficient. And out of the many approaches to setting up a farm, the accessibility and hands-off nature of cloud rendering led to the emergence of third-party cloud-based services. So maybe, Marco, you could say something more about the types of these services.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so today we have access to many types of services that help reduce render times, each in their own way. So each model caters to a different need, right? So we'll go over the more common ones, and some of their advantages and disadvantages. So the first one we see here is the cooperative system rendering scheme. So if you're a Blender user, you probably heard of Sheepit, in which each node is another person's computer. That this person has volunteered to help render your job in the hopes that later on you would do the same. So it's a community of users just volunteering their hardware for rendering, and this serves every user's hardware serves as a node in this sort of render farm, almost sort of render farm kind of scheme. So obviously the advantages to this are that it's free. Your only overhead would be the cost of your electricity. There's probably a point system that will guarantee you more chances of getting your jobs rendered the more often you volunteer your own machine as well, which could be very beneficial, and it's community based, so you get to interact with like-minded individuals, and I suppose you can assist each other outside of what other third-party services might be able to do in some cases. So those are the advantages, and the disadvantages are, of course, the data security is quite low because you render on other person's private computers, and these other users might not have an intention or maybe just the means to keep your data safe. So you may not want to render NDA signed jobs. That could be quite risky. It could be difficult to estimate rendering time because the specs of every volunteer's machine will differ by some degree. So there's no guarantee that a particular frame that rendered on one volunteer's machine, or a particular range of frames that rendered on one volunteer's hardware, will render just as quickly the next time. It could be difficult to troubleshoot issues because, well, you would probably have to deal with them yourself, and it might be difficult to get in contact with a volunteer, especially since, especially if you're working across different time zones or things like that. There is no support team really, and there is no guarantee that all of the computers offered to render your job will even meet the hardware requirements of your scene. So if you have a heavy scene that uses a lot of RAM, you can't be assured that you'll have a machine to render, to even open the scene with. But overall, this could be a very great solution for hobbyists, enthusiasts, or people working on passion projects that don't really have any deadlines, and where security isn't that much of an issue. That's essentially the cooperative scheme. Okay, so let's have a look at the remote server rendering scheme, or the server rental scheme, in which you're given remote access to a powerful server where you can work just as you would on your home or studio computer. And an example of this is our partner service, Sesktop, where you can rent a high-powered GPU server and work with that via a remote connection. So sort of like what you see here on this diagram. With every connection, you connect to one server, and servers usually have some powerful GPU or CPU setup. So some of the advantages are, one, that it is fully customizable. So you treat the server as your remote computer, and you can install there any software that you want. So if you're working with some rare plugins, or even a rare, like an obscure DCC, then you don't really need to worry about whether the service supports it, since you'll be setting it up on your own anyway. It's fully customizable. You can also work within the DCC. So if you're looking to make some quick tweaks in between renders, this is an ideal solution. If you're looking to leverage a high-powered machine and still be able to work within your user interface, then yeah, this is one of the strong points of server rental. And there's no queue. So like I mentioned earlier, on a render farm, for example, you'd be your job will be lined up along with all of the other jobs that have come before. In this case, there is no such thing. The server is yours and yours alone, and there is no waiting required. The disadvantages for this, though, are that you will have to set everything up manually, which also means that if you're using software with a single seat license, that can be a problem. And generally transferring seats can be kind of tedious in many cases. In some instances, people have had to actually buy additional licenses to be able to set up on servers. But then again, once you've configured your server, you can always go back. You can always reboot that server and load the environment that you've set up. So it's sort of like an on-demand extra workstation, basically. Okay, so let's have a look at the IaaS, or Infrastructure as a Service. So this is similar to server rental, but instead of renting a server, you're essentially renting an infrastructure. So the cloud service provides you resources like computing power, data storage, and you can scale this according to your needs. But software installation, including the operating system, and setting up the entire pipeline remains on your end. So Google Cloud and Microsoft Azure Cloud are examples of this service. The advantages are that it is highly customizable and scalable, so you can create a very custom pipeline for your project, and you can create the whole pipeline yourself according to how you like to work or how your studio might like to work. There's a large volume of available resources, so depending on how much you're willing to shell out, you can always grow the infrastructure that you've built. And it's a great solution for big studios with large projects that need custom solutions. Of course, the disadvantage is that you will need in-house tech support. So if you were, for example, an individual, it might not be the best experience ever if you're just looking to render your frames. Because it can be very technical, and it is time consuming to configure, whether you're experienced or not, I think. Okay, so I think that we've gone over the first few services, and now we're ready to have a little intermission. So at this point, we'll go over the comments and answer as many of the questions as we can. And if we miss the questions, don't worry, we'll go back to everything that we've missed. We'll pick up where we left off once we've reached the end of the presentation.
Okay, guys, so Michał here again. So if you have any questions about the presentation so far, something's not clear, maybe you're interested about some details or how this kind of service can affect your pipeline, your studio, then I will be happy to answer from inside of the farm. I've seen everything. I've seen bald animals. I've seen very artistic acid-like animations. I've seen all kinds of visualizations, commercials, and I've gone through all possible problems with software, because when you take your project from your environment and you put it on different environment, which is farm environment, sometimes at first there are some hiccups. So I work in our support team, which is online 24-hour, 7 days a week, and I've been fixing a lot of problems and answering a lot of questions. So I encourage you to ask these questions. So if anything is for you, you are curious about anything or something's maybe not clear in this presentation. And welcome VM. I'm happy you're here. I hope you can hear me, but don't be shy. This is Okay, so since there are no questions, we'll go with the second part of the presentation. But at the end, we are going to have another while to answer your question. So just keep it in mind, and you can actually type them during the presentation, and I will answer them after we finish the presentation.
Okay, so we're back. Hope your questions were answered. And if we missed you, don't worry. We'll get back. We'll pick up where we left off at the end. Okay, so let's pick up where we left off in the presentation, and now we're at the cloud rendering service scheme, which is us, really, GarageFarm.net, and most other render farm services for that matter. So this model allows you to upload your project and all its dependencies and assets to the service provider's file server, and then interface with the render management software from your browser. This model is more or less automated, and the render farm provides not only the data storage and computing power, but also takes care of licensing costs for your 3D rendering software on its infrastructure. So it means that you have absolutely nothing to pay for except the actual usage of the farm. Your software will most likely already be supported, and you won't have to worry about any sort of extra licensing costs or whatnot. So it's really, you're only paying for the volume of rendered data, no additional fees or software setup. And support and tools for you to be able to work with the farm are provided by the farm. So usually services like this provide an application that will allow you to upload your files. Most offer plugins that archive your projects before uploading, so that all your maps and caches are still read by your project on the render farm, as well as create a description of your file that will inform the instructions sent by the task manager. So some farms might require you to prepare your project manually, or archive them using your DCC. And these plugins are usually where you download your rendered frames as well. So once your file is uploaded, you'll be directed to a jobs management application from your browser that will allow you to review settings like which frames you want rendered, how many nodes you want to use, and how the farm should prioritize your job. And from there, you can launch your render, track your progress, and transact with the service generally. So once you've launched the job, the task manager will send the necessary instructions to every node assigned to the job to load your project from the file server and render a frame from a range you've indicated, and save those frames to your user directory for you to download. Okay, so we'll be going through the advantages and disadvantages later on in more detail, but I'd like to turn the mic over to Andrew so he can go over the our render farm scheme in more detail.
Yeah, thank you, Marco. So here's an overview of the GarageFarm.net cloud render farm scheme. This is a simple scheme depicting the GarageFarm.net workflow. As you can see, the workflow parallels that of common cloud rendering services. So I will show you how this general scheme we showed is implemented in case of our farm. The scene is first prepared by our plugin in your DCC. Then it's picked up by our render beamer and uploaded to the farm. Then you manage the rendering process in Web Manager and download the renders again with Render Beamer. So Render Beamer is the uploader and downloader application. Here is a glimpse of our Render Beamer standalone application. Render Beamer is a standalone application which works as an uploader and downloader of files. It works in conjunction with our plugins for 3D applications, which are basically scripts in your DCCs, but you can also use it to send files needed for troubleshooting and set up many options with which will customize the upload and download process to your needs. This slide shows the plugins tab, which indicates which DCC plugins have been installed. So you can install our plugins for all DCCs you use from here, from this tab. Once the DCC is launched, after Render Beamer is installed and running, it can be accessed from within the DCC. On this slide, you can see how the user interface looks like within 3ds Max. So the plugin is a script working within your DCC application, and it prepares the whole project like scene, assets, and creates an archive, which is then automatically picked up by RenderBeamer standalone and uploaded to Farm. It also checks information about your 3D software setup, so it can be mirrored on the Farm automatically. It checks information like software build versions, for example. Here you can choose cameras to render modes like animation or still image. Plugin inherits scene settings by default, but you can modify some render settings there if you want to use different ones than in your scene to render the scene on Farm. Once the job is prepared by the plugin, it is then uploaded to our file server on the Farm. And it's automatic. This is how it looks like in Beamer user interface. One project is uploaded, one is being uploaded, and others are waiting for upload. Our prompt to notify you, this is our prompt to notify you that the upload is complete. Also generates a link to your browser-based personal user dashboard. We call it Web Manager, and here is Web Manager. One more chance to edit global controls. These settings are read from a descriptor file created by our plugin during the preparation process. By default, the settings are taken from your scene, but you can override some of them here again. Here is a glimpse of Web Manager once the job is submitted. Web Manager is our browser dashboard where you can monitor and manage the jobs rendering on the Farm. It contains all data about renders, billing, payments, and links to support resources. This is one of the places where you can open our chat. This is a more detailed view. This is a more detailed Web Manager view. On the bottom left, this section allows you to monitor progress and status of your jobs, as well as the estimated and actual costs. You can see the number of nodes rendering your jobs, various stats like cost, estimated costs, and rendering logs. On the top there is Project Files Manager. It works similarly to the Windows Explorer. You can check your files there and add job to rendering from there as well. You can preview frames and upload the textures. On the bottom right, this is a list of rendered frames. You can check information like rendering progress taken from 3D application logs and rendering logs. And here we return to RenderBeamer to download our frames from the Downloads tab. It happens automatically by default, but you can specify the download folder in the settings. So maybe, Marco, you could say something more about cloud rendering advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah, sure. So almost all cloud rendering services run in a similar way. And they can differ in terms of workflow, in the level of sophistication of tools, and maybe how intuitive the whole process is. So sorry, by cloud rendering services, we're talking now about cloud-based render farm services specifically. Okay, so the advantages are that it's on demand. So cloud-based rendering services can be accessed from anywhere in the world. All you need is an internet connection and require absolutely no maintenance on your part. Even the parts working on your computer, to an extent, are maintained and troubleshot by us in terms of software updates, software hotfixes. We take care of that. All you need is a computer with your DCC installed, a scene, and an internet connection, really. And the only thing you need to take care of is to make sure that your scene renders correctly on your computer. Okay, so the another advantage is scalability or size. So the services like this charge by hours of use, which means they can be used on demand, and without any additional cost, which means you only pay for the time of rendering. And if you optimize your scene, the cost of rendering drops. And if you need additional rendering power, you can always opt for a higher tier or a higher priority that offers you more nodes for the job, and a higher level at the queue. Okay, so some customers actually might, studios, for example, in our case, work with us and they have their own in-house farms, but at some point they need additional rendering power, and so we help them scale their rendering pipeline, basically, by taking over some of the frames that are beyond their in-house render farm's capacity, basically. Another advantage is automation, so the whole process is automated. Like Andrew mentioned earlier, really it's only a few clicks on your end to get the job running on the farm. It's very simple, it's hands-off, and it's low upkeep, basically. You don't have to bear any additional costs for setup, and you could upload your jobs from anywhere in the world, like we mentioned. And well, that basically sums it up. So those are the advantages. Let's have a look at some of the disadvantages now. Okay, so common disadvantages are that the support is limited, and the support for dependencies. So we'll use dependencies to describe assets in your scene, like texture maps, HDRIs, caches, scenes that are being instanced from. All of these are fall into what we would call dependencies in this case. So the support for dependencies like these are can be problematic sometimes. There can be problems with relinking your assets, basically, because the scene is taken from your custom environment. If you have any dependencies that are generated by a plugin, for example, that isn't supported on the farm, then those dependencies might not even be detected by the farm's scene preparation software. And of course, no render farm can support can mirror your software setup exactly, unless you're working vanilla. And in cases where, for example, you might be using unofficial builds, that like these are the level of support basically differs from farm to farm. It's also unpredictable because in some cases costs you end up having to pay regardless of whether your frames have rendered successfully. So you might have sent a job over, run some tests, something goes wrong, and then you get your frames back and see that a character is missing some hair in a couple of frames, or but as far as the system is concerned, it was a successful render. Like there were no error prompts that terminated the render, for example, and so it was considered as a successful frame, and you were charged for it. And then you realize that it didn't render quite right. And then you might try to talk to support, but support might be slow. And slow is relative to how quickly you need, how responsive you need a render farm to be, depending on like the level of urgency of your project. So a support ticket you might submit a support ticket and wait 24 hours, which would be reasonable in some situations, I'm sure. But when you're trying to beat like a 3 o'clock deadline and you're still fighting with your renders at like 11 a.m. That again, not a nice feeling to feel. Okay, but these are basically the main disadvantages of third-party cloud-based render farm services. And I'll pass it over to Andrew to talk about how we as GarageFarm.net specifically anticipate these problems and address them.
Mm-hmm. So on GarageFarm.net we are aware of all these downsides of cloud rendering, and this is how we address these problems. So the first thing is dynamic automation. So the scene preparation plugin and Render Beamer are updated regularly. Our Render Beamer updates itself and our plugins automatically when we release new versions or when we add new features and fixes. We have an automatic deployment of most common plugins like V-Ray, Corona, Forest Pack, Anima, and those which are often used as older builds. Our plugin recognizes your plugin version, and the system automatically sets the rendering nodes to use this version. Another thing is support for plugins and software. Support for plugins and software are accommodated within Reason. So we support most popular plugins and update them regularly. Also, if you are using a less popular plugin, we can buy it if the cost of rendering will cover the cost of purchasing the license or licenses. For example, if the plugin cost is $100, we buy it if you render for $100. Another thing is, I think this is our stronger part. We offer 24 hours, 7 days in a week live support. Wranglers communicate in real time and troubleshoot errors in real time. We react in real time on chat and answer every question and start working on every problem as soon as possible, usually immediately. Our job is to make sure that the frames on our farm render exactly the same as on your computer, so we don't troubleshoot problems which exist in your scenes on your end. Another thing is proactive monitoring. This is part of the live support. So the issues are reported as soon as they are spotted, and Wranglers will take it upon themselves to post jobs that are generating failed frames. Of course, we can only notice the obvious issues like failing rendering, hanging rendering, obviously too long rendering, like hanging buckets, for example. We can't recognize the errors which require the knowledge of the final result to be recognized. So in this case, we'll contact you on the chat, or if you are offline via email, if we notice a problem demanding some action. So if we notice, for example, low CPU usage, very long rendering times, we'll pause or kill a job and ask you for contact. Still, you need to run tests and monitor your jobs. We can only notice obvious problems. And here is how our chat window looks like. Martin is on the shift right now. So if you open your chat window, even now, you will see such an image, and you can start the conversation immediately. Another part of the proactive troubleshooting is that we take into consideration your deadlines. So Wranglers are doing their best to find a fix for your issue so you can have your correct frames. Sometimes it requires some bypass or workaround from Wranglers to get the scene rendering, And in the background, developers are working on permanent fix. So we remember about your deadline, and if you need more, if needed, more team members get involved in resolving the issue. And the last thing is general starting credits for first-time users, so that the farm's compatibility with a particular setup can be tested without a need to commit any funds. So yeah, so that's how we deal with those problems.
All right, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, so basically, this is our mission in providing our service to you. We want to keep things straightforward on your end, as straightforward as possible, as intuitive as possible, stay affordable, and to keep you worry-free on your way to meeting that deadline. Yeah, so that's the end of our presentation. Thanks for sticking with us to the end. And now we'll have a look at your questions and resume the Q&A.
Okay, so Michał here back. So I can see there are some questions. So VM asks, do you work with Corona renderer? Yes, we support Corona renderer, and we support all the versions with something we call auto deployment. So basically how it works is when you run your plugin in, for example, 3ds Max with Corona used, sorry, I had to mute myself in the YouTube. So when you are using Corona, for example, with 3ds Max, our plugin, which is preparing the whole project to be uploaded to the farm, also checks your exact build of Corona, and it saves it in a information file called GFS, which is uploaded with your project to our farm. And then our system uses this GFS information file to prepare all the nodes to match the software which you are using. So for example, before rendering, it will install or deploy your exact Corona build on the nodes which are going to render your scene. It's not even about installing, because they are not installed in the way you install it on your computer. This is faster process because we just have ready extracted files which are then copied to the right folders. So it is very fast process. So every time, let's say you work with Corona 5.1.0, then your scene is going to be rendered on the nodes with Corona 5.1.0. And also there's one exception that we, by default, we don't support beta, alpha, test builds, nightly builds, daily builds, because they tend to create problems. Sometimes with command line rendering, which we are using on farm, because this is all scripted. So if you are using this kind of build, experimental build, I encourage you to ask us on our chat if we could add this build to the farm, and then you could try to render with it. Of course, using such a build requires more testing before final rendering. And in general, testing the scene on the farm before final rendering is very important, but especially in this kind of builds. So yeah, sometimes it happens. Recently, it happened that one of the customers used some very experimental build of Corona, which was not even, I think, accessible for us to download, because it was just a person who
who was very close to the Corona developer, and he was like a beta tester. So he tried to render a nightly build of some new Corona version on our farm, and there were some issues with rendering, and yeah, they were caused by the fact that this is experimental build. But when it comes to official releases, we support all the builds, and on top of that, you can be sure that we are going to render on exactly your build of Corona. Or it also works that way with V-Ray and the most popular plugins like let's say Multiscatter, Anima. We have a very close relations with Anima developers. We have a lot of discussions with them, and we are one of the companies which reports, I think, the most bugs which appear in Anima, and they are very happy to fix them and let us know that in the next version it is fixed. And yeah, there's a lot of software which we support like that, with this automatic matching the version to your version used in your scene. Mostly it's about plugins which, when users tend to sometimes use older builds, and Corona is like that. I mean, a lot of Corona users are not really using every time the newest release. They like to sometimes stay with some older releases. So yeah, so this is the answer is yes with all this additional information. So I'm also looking for some more questions. Guys, if you have any questions, this is a very good moment to ask, because you can ask all these questions also on our chat, because there's a wrangler online all the time who's going to answer these questions. But I think on this stream you can ask even more technical or like insiders questions, which okay, so mhm. Ivona asks, are there any common rookie mistakes I should be aware of the using a render farm? Yes, there are several ones, and I think the one which is the most common happening and has the worst consequences is not running a test of your scene, especially animation, before final rendering. So our system offers you a very convenient way of testing your scenes. You basically can add a step to your rendering range. So for example, if you render frames from 1 to 200, you can set the range in submit window in Web Manager to 1 to 200 as 20. So it will render 10 frames every 20th frame. So based on that, the first thing is that you will just check if the frames are rendering correctly without rendering the whole range. And the second thing is that our system, based on such a test, is going to give you a very close estimate. So we also have a cost calculator online, but it gives a very rough estimate. And this is not something you can, calculate your estimate on cost calculator and then expect that the cost is going to be the same. This cost calculator is rather there so you have an idea what kind of level of cost you can expect. If this is $100 or maybe $1,000, because cost calculators don't take it into account the time of loading and opening your scene in 3D application and all the random situations. So it only compares the benchmarks of your processor and our processors. And also very often customers who use cost calculator, they are asked to input an average rendering time per frame. And I noticed that very often it's very optimistic. Customers put their very optimistic values. So, for example, if the frames are rendering on average between 3 and 5 minutes, very often customers put their 3 minutes, as if lower estimate in cost calculator is going to help them to cut on the cost. So cost calculators are in general a way to compare the general costs of rendering on various farms, because they use in a very similar way on every farm. But if you want to get a close cost estimate that you would be, almost 100% sure that your scene is going to render, to give you that cost, is the best is to run a test with a step. So this is the first error. Also, I have been working for many years here, and I work with thousands of scenes and hundreds of thousands of issues with rendering. So I noticed that, for example, very often customers assume that if they have a scene and it renders fine on farm, and then they, let's say, take one asset, like let's say a chair, and move it 5 centimeters right, and they upload it without testing, for them it means, even if I ask them if this is exactly the same scene that you tested, yes, this is exactly the same scene. But after a long conversation, it appears that this is exactly the same scene, except the chair, which is standing in a different place. And of course, you can say, well, this is such a small difference that it doesn't explain, let's say, twice as high cost of rendering. But when we get to analyze this scene, because sometimes customers ask us to check it, how this is possible, it appears that, let's say, after moving the chair 5 centimeters right, some very long rendering shader appears in the frames, and this is causing such a high cost. So from our point of view of farmers, the same scene, when we ask to upload the same scene, for example, not without the plugin but with Render Beamer, so the plugin is not so the version which was not modified by our plugin, so we can see the original raw scene which was on your end, saved on your end, to see the difference, what's happened there. Very often customers don't understand it as sending us exactly the same save. Sometimes very little changes in scenes can result in very long rendering times, very different rendering times. And I think this is something you also experience on your computers. You just, from time to time, I'm sure you had a situation where you made some little mistake and all of a sudden you have a lot of, I don't know, artifacts or scene crashes or just renders 5 times longer. I think this is also the stuff you experience on your end. And another so not testing the scenes is a mistake. Not testing the scene on your end is also a mistake. So changing the settings, not rendering it on your computer, and just sending it to farm, this is also a mistake. Sometimes some customers have to, honestly admit, well, we are sorry, that was the issue on our end. We changed something in the scene, we didn't render another test, we uploaded into the farm, and it rendered much more longer. And when we check on our end, yeah, it renders like that on our end too. We just didn't check it. One of the mistakes is, this is not a mistake really. This is something that Wranglers won't let you get away with. It's when we very often, when we troubleshoot, we first need to know if we really rendered your scene on exactly the same setup as yours. And for example, that GFS file, maybe that process failed or something went wrong. And very often customers said, let's say, I ask which build of Corona are you using, and I get answer the newest one. So this is very frustrating for farmers, because this is from my experience is that every time I assume that I understand what the customer is talking about, almost every time I'm wrong, and this is leading to even more problems. So the last build is not enough. You need to give us the number of the build. Why? Because very often farms are using different builds than, let's say, retail customers. Sometimes there are builds built especially for farms. Sometimes you will get the build. Sometimes there is another way. You are using, let's say, Corona 5, but for farms there's already Corona 5.2, and we are using that. So for us, this is the latest. So yeah, we very much press the customers to give us the builds of the farm, and very often the customers who just start to work with us use this answer. I'm using the latest, which is annoying also, because a lot of developers, when you visit their website, they are just advertising, we have the new version and it has these features, but not very often they give the number, like we just released Corona 5.02, and you need to get into some research and documentation and other places what really is the number of this release, so we can ensure that we are rendering on the same one. So I think these are the most often mistakes. I mean, like the maximum, the most like drastic example of it is just to make your scene, don't really test it so much on your end, upload it to the farm without testing on the farm, take a high priority with a lot of frames, and go to sleep, and then wake up the next day with rendering for $1,000 when your budget was $300. So yeah, this is the most common mistake, and we are going to address it in the second part of the live stream. In this second part, we are going to we will focus only on the technical parts of using farm. We have a lot of tips, very big experience, and we know really what to do to avoid all the negative sides of using the farm. So you just get this advantage without paying sometimes not very pleasant costs of using the farm. I think lots of tips and testing techniques and stuff like that. Yeah, so maybe guys, you have some more questions. Actually, my answer was, I thought that I will cover as much as I can. So yeah, so guys, if you don't have any more questions, everyone who was here on the presentation, on the stream, you will get a little present which is free testing credits, and I will send you an article on which this stream was based. It was written by our team after like years of the same questions going back to us. We decided to write an article so you can read it and really know everything you should know about farms, both about this general part which we talked about now, and the part where we are talking about special techniques and tips, so you can get ahead of your competition with that knowledge. Okay, so thank you a lot, guys, for being here. Thank you for VM. Thank you, Valentina, for being here with us, and Johnny. It's a lot of satisfaction to to share this knowledge with people who are curious, and maybe see you in the second part, the technical part of the stream soon.